Informed Cyber podcast, broadcasting out to the world. Welcome. I'm Al Pisano. I'm loving being with the two of you today for our Pioneer podcast. Welcome. You guys want to do a quick intro? Al Pisano here, and I do a lot of everything in cyber and education and leadership and all those fun things. So I'm happy to have Brandon Schaefer and Dan Massey. You guys want to do a quick intro, and we'll get into a little bit about what is this cybersecurity thing that people are talking about.
Sounds great. I guess I'll go. It's great to be on the podcast with you guys. I think this is going to be a lot of fun, and so I come more from the technical end of cybersecurity. I've done a lot of work on the technical side. Wrote some cybersecurity standards, but more recently been really focused on sort of the management piece and how do you make cybersecurity work. And thrilled to be talking with Al and Brandon, who I think we kind of share a lot of common philosophy on why this is important and what we can get done. So I'm excited to get started. But but I don't want to keep Brandon from getting his introduction in. So Brandon, excited to have you on as well. What's going on?
Dan and Al, thank you guys for inviting me to join the conversation. My background is as a policymaker. I'm a former state legislator and have been very interested in the policy developments around cybersecurity, both at the state level, at the federal level, and that is the perspective that I'll bring to the conversation today. So really looking forward to it. Thank you guys.
Awesome. So we have a pretty quick podcast today, and we're hopes to do this on a weekly basis and get into a little bit more about cyber. What is cyber? Some tips and tricks around cyber, current events, what's going on in cyber today. But our goal for this one is to really sort of introduce what we want to do here and really introduce cybersecurity. And we've had many conversations around this, but I'd love to hear thoughts from the team on what sort of a 30,000 foot view of cybersecurity and how it might impact us all in general for just a few minutes of time. Dan, you want to lead it off, and then we'll go to Brandon, and I'll add some comments as well.
Absolutely. So I'll kick it off with a little more of the technical side, and as always, Al and Brandon can kind of make sure I stay in reality and don't get too crazy in the technical stuff. But cybersecurity is really critical right now. One thing we like to say, it's now a C-level responsibility, meaning if you're on a board of directors, if you're a top leader in a company, this is something you have to know. There's some reasons for that. Obviously, we see a lot of stuff in the news. Brandon and Al, we were talking about some of the various attacks that have been occurring, in the area where we are. We've had some cities hit with ransomware attacks. In fact, a city just paid $45K. Of course, we've had bigger stories where there have been national and state level organizations that have been hit by ransomware. And the other scary thing is 70% of small businesses fail within 6 months after a cyber attack. Right. And you hear slightly different stats from different places, but the key thing is, you're likely to be a target, no matter what size business you are. And if you are hit, it's likely to be a real serious consequence for the business. And so, I think there's some important technical things, and thanks to good coaching from Brandon and Al, I will not immediately dive too deep into, Metasploit and, patch this and patch that. But I think it's really a critical thing to understand, and I think it is something we can understand at that C-level.
Yeah, and Dan, I want to hear Brandon's thought as well. We've talked about this before. There is a tech side, and it's a very important side to cybersecurity, but there's also a human side, and as well as an organizational leadership side. And those are some of the areas we'll delve into. There's a legal piece too, right, Brandon? And then there's a culpability and an ethical piece as well that maybe you could speak to.
For sure, and I really appreciate you mentioning the ethical piece, because that's really where it all starts, right? It's the right thing to do. If you are running a business, or if you're a governmental entity and you're collecting information about customers or about citizens in your jurisdiction, you've got to make sure that you're taking precautions to manage that information correctly. People have a right to privacy, right to security, and in their personal information. So if you're going to collect that information, you have to secure it correctly. And there's a whole regime of both federal and state rules and regulations that govern what the requirements are. And at the bottom line, there's also significant dollars and cents that are at stake. Whether those are tax dollars or whether those are private funds. You'd much rather be spending the small amount of money on the front end to make sure you're doing this the right way. You have a plan in place to protect the information that you're keeping, than hiring lawyers on the back end to try to figure out, well, what do I do now if you are hit with an attack? So we can get into some of the details of having an action plan ready to go, and some of the things that you can do to really protect yourself from a legal perspective in future conversations that we have. But big picture, this is a much less expensive proposition to address the issues that you can address up front instead of trying to address them on the back end. And it's the right thing to do. So I look forward to exploring with you and the group in more depth the specifics, but that's the high level message to go out with.
Yeah, and we've talked a number of times about your cyber story, Dan and Brendan, and I think from a legal perspective, from a technical perspective, from the human perspective, your cyber story and creating that or evolving that as an organization is key, and the preventative piece is key, right? So whether we're talking about tech, whether we're talking about a strategic plan around cyber, it's going to protect from an ethical perspective, it's going to protect from a legal perspective, it's going to protect from a financial perspective. So those are the pieces that we're talking about. We're talking about being proactive and creating a story for your organization, so that if you are hit with something, you're in a better place, or hopefully there's less chance of you getting a hit to begin with a cyber attack. Nothing is impossible. Those hackers out there, the cyber security, they're going after you no matter what you do, right? But it's about developing that story and putting yourself in the best position to, yes, possibly prevent, but also if something does happen, be in the right space, correct?
For sure, that's exactly right. There is, you'd much rather show up, whether it's a client or whether it's a courtroom, and say, here are all the things that we thought of in advance. We anticipated potential issues and we took these actions to protect information. Somebody still was able to, penetrate our system and create an incident. But, here's what we did to protect the information. We were mindful of the situation, as opposed to the opposite situation, which is like, well, geez, we didn't really think of that. Right, that is not a good place to be in, and so I think that's really why we're having these conversations. I think they're with you and Dan, they're from an organizational and from a technical perspective, advice on what you can do, but then there's also the perspective of the legal perspective. What are the potential ramifications if you don't do it, and those are all things that we need to be mindful of.
And so I love the idea that we've coined, we've kind of coined this term of, what's your cyber story? And I think what I'm hearing, and I kind of know this because we talk about this a lot, but the big message here is it's a hugely different environment if you have a cyber story and you have something planned ahead of time. Now, I don't have all the cool, legal experience and stuff that Brandon does, and the excellent business stuff, Al writing multiple books on business leadership. But I think, all of us can kind of get behind this idea of it's a whole different environment to say, I never thought that was going to happen. Now what do I do? Versus a little bit of planning ahead. And whether you're in court, whether you're just ethically managing your business for your customers, for your organization, knowing that I think is really critical. And so, but let me throw out one other thing there, which is, so, okay, I can understand, if this was a Fortune 500 company, we've all worked for various government agencies who clearly need to, have a good cyber story. Hey, what if I'm just an average little small business? I mean, do I need to, am I gonna get attacked? I mean, who's gonna attack me? Am I a potential victim?
right? I
And
think it's,
so, go ahead, Brendan.
you know, I think it's an interesting question, and one of the things that we're seeing, I think there was a recent incident in the City of Lafayette here in Boulder County, and the ask, the ransom that was asked, to release the information that was sequestered was, $45,000, which isn't a huge amount of money, right? You think of these incidents, you see the big headlines in the newspapers or on the nightly news, and it's always for millions and millions and millions of dollars. But what we're finding is that more and more the perpetrators of these crimes are very sophisticated, and they do their research and figure out what is an appropriate ransom, if you will, for my illegal endeavor here. And so I think it's very, very possible that some of the smaller businesses are very vulnerable as well. And with all of the other things that small businesses have to think about and manage through, this may not be the first one on their list. And I think part of the conversation that we're having here is to help people understand the importance of adding this to the list and bumping it up in priority, because you are vulnerable and you are a potential target in the future.
And Brandon, just to clarify, well, two things. We're not the City of Lafayette. It can happen to anyone. So we're not saying they've done anything worse than anyone else, right? But the other piece is you said the appropriate amount for these criminals to basically get the money for in this example, the City of Lafayette. And by that, we mean the people who are doing the cyber attacks are not going to ask a small time business for ransomware of $1 million. They know they'll never get it, right? So they ask the amount that threshold that they think they've done their research. This is, like you said, sophisticated. They ask an amount that they think they can get without too much kickback or without too much resistance. That's part of their strategy, and they have a strategy and they have a story to attack. So you should really have that story in turn. Internally, you have your own cyber story to protect against that and to navigate and mitigate anything that may happen to you.
Yeah, I think that's really important because the bad guys do have a cyber story, right? And the bad guys may not be particularly targeting this city or this company. What they're looking for is anybody that they can get, anybody who will pay them. And one of the most impressive things I've seen on the bad guy side is the economic modeling to say, hey, I'm going to ask you an amount that you're likely going to pay, and that's kind of impressive, in not in a good way for those of us on the defensive side, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing is, they're looking around and they're just, targets of opportunity, and you might say like, hey, who's going to attack my company? You might, that would be sort of an analogy to like, well, who's going to break into my car, right? There's not a bad guy out there specifically looking to break into Dan's car or Brandon's car. Maybe Al's car. Maybe Al, are people specifically targeting your car? Or
well, it's a great example of what cyber attackers do, because we did actually a few weeks ago have a number of cars broken into in our neighborhood. The interesting part is none of them had broken windows. They only entered cars with open doors, which mine happened to be one of them on that specific night. So their strategy, their story was to walk down the block, path of least resistance, check all the doors. They literally checked the other car in my driveway that was locked, did not go into that, went into the open car, and they took whatever they could get out of the car. But again, they didn't grab my radio. They didn't do high value things. They just took sort of what was laying around. So again, that threshold, even at a low level of a physical attack and a physical robbery, they knew what they can sort of get away with without stirring things up too much. And that's what criminals are thinking that way. They're thinking of what story they have and what the system will allow. They're thinking that way. So we better think of that way as individuals that are trying to protect against that as well.
For sure.
And we're almost at time here. I know this was a quick one. It was a great conversation. Just quick plug for Inform Cyber and what our team is trying to do. we're really trying to help people develop that story. So more on that to come as our business model evolves. But that's the goal of what we want to do: help you develop a cyber story. But with that, we want this podcast to be beneficial to folks just in general, so that we can get the word out there, get the messaging out there as well. Any final thoughts to add, either Brandon or Dan?
Sure.
The thing I'm sorry, go ahead.
So Dan, go ahead, and then we'll go with Brandon.
All right, I'll go real quick. So I just want to throw in just a few quick things as more of the techie guy on this one. We're not suggesting that a cyber story doesn't mean that you have to have NSA level security, and we're not a bad cybersecurity group is going to come in and tell you all the deep technical things you have to do. We can of course do that, Brandon, Al, myself, the rest of the team are have that expertise. But just a few quick things, to say that you ought to be thinking about this, right? What are you doing for patches? What are you doing for protecting against that human factor, like those phishing attacks? And it's like what Al said, think of your business or your organization as similar to that car. Did you roll up the window? Did you lock the door? We're not asking you to put a multi-million-dollar, auto theft detection system on your vehicle. We're saying like, hey, you're less likely to be broken into if you lock the door. And things like patches, things like password policies, and just a little bit of forethought can get you a huge way. And you need to have that cyber story. And it doesn't mean you need to have a PhD in cybersecurity.
I'll wrap up where I started, really, which is, it's the right thing to do, right? Especially if you're managing information of clients or third parties. It's the right thing to do is make sure that your system is secure and that information is invulnerable. And there's a huge cost benefit to taking proactive steps to locking down your system, instead of having to pick up the phone and call an attorney on the back end to ask, what do I do now that I have been hacked, now that somebody has infiltrated my system.
Yeah, and it's the right thing to do on multiple levels, as you said. And don't forget, your business goes down and you're a small business, everybody that's involved in the business gets hurt as well. So it affects exponentially a lot of people, a lot of families. So these are the things to consider to make sure everything stays in the right place. And like we said, make sure you have a good cyber story. We're going to wrap up there. We will be on again next week. We're hoping to do this on a weekly basis. Hopefully you guys could leave some comments, add whatever you'd like to add in the comments, and we'll get back to you. It's been great, guys. Thank you for our launch effort on this. Looking forward to more of these.
Sounds great.